archaeology this week and next week, and David will be back the week thereafter. So some of y'all remember what we went over last time. I'll just quickly skip through that just as a brief recap. Okay. So these are two helpful books there we mentioned. And there's a helpful website that has some information, but for sake of time, and this is a YouTube channel, Expedition Bible, which is quite interesting. So we're just going through, we found again a Chrome extension where we can take YouTube snapshots really easily without all the artifacts. So that's what we basically did. And then also, since he uses a different version of scripture, then I just used eSword and got the verses myself that he mentions. So you guys remember this from last time in Jordan there, this large tell, which is a large city unto itself. Whenever you find a tell, there's a lot of stuff buried there in layers, and without going through all this information again, you can check out the video online, but it mentions what they found there, which was a Balaam, the son of Beor, mentioned there in Numbers chapter 22, verse 5. All right. And they found a wall with plaster on it, a facade. Then they read the plaster, and it mentions from way back there his name at the right place, because that's where he was supposed to be at. And then we went to another video here, and there is a place, let's go back here. It is the Temple of Soleb site. It's in modern day Sudan. It used to be in Egypt. And he drove there, and we mentioned that they found an inscription which says Land Nomads Yahweh. And you can drive there today, and you can see that inscription. And it was built by Amenhotep III, and there are pillars there. This is over 3,400 years old. And you can see a person there with their arms tied behind their back, mentioning which people they were, because they're mentioning they were their slaves, they had conquered them. All the people you conquered, and then if you walk over here, you see this one, which has the hieroglyphics on there, which is Land Nomads Yahweh, right at the right time when they were actually wandering around in the wilderness. So not just a coincidence. And then we talked about how the Assyrians were going for the 10 northern tribes and took them over. And let's breeze on through. They found this little guy that mentions Hezekiah and how he and his towns were laid to waste there, including the town of Samaria, which was their capital. And this is where they came from, way over there, the Babylonian Empire. And then they finally made their way to Judah, the other tribes, and we'll breeze through these maps really quickly here. All right. So we're just trying to do a brief recap here. We talked about elevation of places, including these places in Turkey and Mount Sinai and all of that. And we talked about the people that excavated these sites. We talked about how when the 10 northern tribes were conquered, there they had to flee. So they went to Jerusalem, and all these hastily built sites can be found. And Jerusalem then had to build a wall around all these people who had rushed there as refugees and had not been taken. And you can see Hezekiah's wall back when it was excavated and what it looks like today. It's still there in Jerusalem, and how they can, we'll just breeze on through this stuff here. These are facades which were from these Babylonian places. And we talked about some of that stuff. You can go back through that and what they used to look like, essentially. So there are Babylonian towns of Nineveh and Babylon itself. Nineveh is about 253 miles to the north. And then we get to this next video about Jericho, which is quite large. And this is where we dropped off last time. We didn't mention much about Jericho, but there were these different people that excavated the site. We see there were some Germans there, Ernst and Karl, in the early 1900s. Then John Garstang excavated it in the 30s, and in the 1950s, Dame Kathleen Mary Kenyon excavated it as well, and way back to the 1800s as well. So this is Garstang, and that's Kathleen Mary. And when John excavated in the 30s, he agreed that it matched the Bible's accounts, but Kathleen was not convinced because she was looking for something that wasn't there. She didn't pay attention to the pottery they found, which was pottery that matched up with other sites of that time period in the layer. She was basically looking at the layers, right? And so she was looking for pottery from Cyprus, which we know as Cypriotic pottery, and because she didn't see it, then she dated it a certain age. But there were counterfeit pottery of the same style, which means they had already seen Cypriotic pottery, which again means it wasn't 1550 BC, it was around the 1400 BC when this layer was, when all the action was at this layer. And so, because she did not deal with that, then this guy goes to the site. These people agree with her, and a lot of other people, that all this stuff in this layer, it must not be Jericho at the time. However, they will explain why. It really is the right layer, the right timetable, and it lines up with Scripture. This is a guy that used to work. There's Peter again, Peter Parr. He worked with Mary and Kathleen, and so he came back on site. That's what he looks like. And they tried to talk to him about what they had discovered. That's Mary again. And there's Peter, older pictures. This is a guy who did a dissertation on the pottery of the area, the Canaanite pottery, and all that stuff. All right, Canaanite pottery of the late Bronze Age, which would be Bronze Age 1. And that's an example of it there. It is critical for dating sites. As we talked about parallel pottery, you can find pottery here that matches up with pottery down the road from that same time period. It helps you to date stuff because it doesn't, burn up that well. All right, this is the guy from the YouTube channel, and there's an example of a tell that's not been excavated. They're all over the place. All right. And so he makes a cake to show how there's layers in the tell. And this is old pictures of when it was excavated years ago, back in the 1950s. All right, let's breeze on through here. This is where we left off. So nearby this site where these people are excavating currently, there's a place where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the Qumran National Park, 13 miles by car from Jericho. And it's interesting because some of the scrolls there talked about Jericho. So we're going to, this is where they're currently digging around the Dead Sea Scrolls area. And then they walk down, there's a picture of the area. And he walks the chap down to one of them where they found a few particular scrolls from Joshua, the book of Joshua in the Old Testament that talks about what happened to Jericho. All right, then we get to the German team there, Ernst and Karl, as they excavated it. There are their pictures. And then there are some pictures of excavations from many years ago. Now, this is sort of how the walls of Jericho were built. You can see there's a retaining wall. We're familiar with retaining walls. They're all over the place today, right? And then you have an earthen embankment to hold back the dirt. This is how you're going to build your city, on top of the plains and such. And then you can find today at Jericho, here are the retaining walls you can see that have been excavated thoroughly by these people. He shows a little example of how they function. And then there's a guy standing at the top of one, the bottom of one. But this is not the walls that fell down. See the mud brick wall right there? It was built on top of the retaining wall. And that is what fell down. Okay. So these are the different maps of Jericho and when they were excavated, different sections by the different people. And we can rotate that. And then we can look at it like what it used to look like. And then we can sort of make a computer model of that, which they did. And this is sort of like from what they can tell, Jericho used to look like. So let's kind of fly around the town. You can see the walls there. There are multiple walls they've found. All right, so quite a large place, many places for homes, quite an intimidating place if you are, the Israelites and you're walking by and you have to defeat this place. So let's go on here. And Joshua chapter 6, verse 20, so the people shouted when the priests blew with trumpets, and it came to pass when the people heard the sound of the trumpet, and the people shouted with a great shout, that the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city. And you say, well, why are all these things mentioned? Well, every word's important, right? Every man straight before him, and they took the city, and they utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, young and old, and ox and sheep and ass with the edge of the sword. Okay, here's a picture of that freestanding there, the retaining wall. The mud brick wall on top of the retaining wall fell outward. This does not normally happen. So that big old wall on top of the retaining wall, from what they've dug up, they excavated piles of mud bricks at the base of the retaining wall. So here's a picture of the wall, and here's what happened. There's the wall, and that's what they found. That's not normal. Because normally, these old sites have been pillaged, where they take stones like the gleaming white limestone of the pyramids and they move them somewhere else. They use them for construction in towns. They use them for other pyramids later years. So a lot of times, these places will be picked apart slowly, and you'll find that across the world. But this is quite unique. And so we have a little picture here. Let's see if we have a zoomed in part. Yeah, there's a zoomed in part. So as they dug down, they went through all these different layers. At the very top, you can see the Byzantine rubble pits, and then they went below that, and they found the red bricks there. They found the walls, and it's quite interesting what they found many years ago, and the state in which they found it, as those walls collapsed. No other city which has been excavated where a city wall has been found like this to have fallen down in this fashion. And notice when it falls down like that, it makes it very easy to walk right into the town, doesn't it? So how did they get up the retaining wall? Well, the other wall, as you can see, based on what they found, the mud brick wall, this makes a nice little ramp, just like the Bible states. Quite interesting. And they burnt the city with fire, and all that was therein, only the silver and the gold, and the vessels of brass and of iron, they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. And of course, Achan stole stuff, and then they went to fight Ai, and they were punished because Achan stole stuff and hid it in his tent. Then they had to deal with the sin in the camp. But they find burn layers right at the right time that it should be. But not only that. So we found the retaining wall and the mud brick wall that's fallen down. Outside of it, they walked up. We found the burnt layers here. You can see burnt patches, and there's quite extensive burn layers throughout the entire tell. There's some more example of burnt layers all over the place. So they dug trenches to see if they could find the same destruction layer, which Garstang found in the 30s. In the 1950s, they did find it. There's a 3-foot thick burn layer throughout, with ash, collapsed roof timbers, etc., from a fire. And when it's a white burnt layer, they say it's burned with a high heat, and it works out. Things are ash. So quite a number of burned things were found. They found many rooms in this burnt layer with large pottery storage jars, which were full of grain and wheat, and all of them had been burned. And we'll tell you why that's important here shortly. So you can dig that up. And as they that bear the ark were coming to Jordan, and the feet of the priests that bear the ark were dipped in the brim of the water, for Jordan overfloweth all his banks at the time of harvest. That's in Joshua 3:15. And so, they were finishing up their wilderness adventure for 40 years, and then they crossed over to the promised land, and they started having to, defeat these places. And Joshua chapter 5, verse 10, and the children of Israel encamped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at even in the plains of Jericho. It tells us where they were, what time of the year it was. And they did eat of the old corn of the land on the morrow after the Passover, unleavened cakes and parched corn the selfsame day. And the manna ceased on the morrow after they had eaten of the old corn of the land. Neither had the children of Israel manna any more, but they did eat of the fruit of the land of Canaan that year. So interesting time for the Canaan. But let's move on. In this area, the southern Jordan Valley, the harvest time is in the spring. Therefore, it makes sense that the pots in Jericho would be full of grain from the recent spring harvest, and that the same grain would have been thoroughly burned, which is what they found. It's not a coincidence. And you go there today, this is what it looks like. They're still taking care of the wheat that has burned. Well, this has not burned, but you see them taking care of it there. Joshua chapter 6, verse 18, and ye in any wise keep yourselves from the accursed thing, lest you make yourselves accursed. When you take of the accursed thing and make the camp of Israel accursed and trouble it, talking about how they need to burn the place. And let's move on here. Burn layers. She even concluded that the earthquake and the mud walls collapsed before the fire happened in the city. So she did agree to that. However, she still refused to think that what she was excavating correlated to the Bible's account at that particular time. And so, well, let's see here. Let's go back to this guy. There is a curse about Joshua chapter 6, verse 26, and Joshua adjured them at this time, saying, Cursed be the man before the Lord that riseth up and buildeth the city Jericho. He shall lay the foundation thereof, and his firstborn, and in the youngest son shall he set up the gates of it. So they're not going to be building on the town in the coming years, right? So what was found in the layers above the fire layer of devastation? They found erosion layers above that layer. They found material rolling down the hillside. They did not find a new city being built there. But basically it was abandoned after the destruction, which works out with the Bible. And we can see the retaining wall still there and a bunch of other stuff. And there's a picture of the retaining wall again. Now, we can also date this time because when Solomon built the temple later on, we can trace back to an exact date. And Solomon mentions, it came to pass in the 480th year after the children of Israel were come out of the land of Egypt. So it's been 480 years since they left Egypt. And they wandered in Egypt, they wandered in the wilderness for how many years? 40 years, right? And then it tells us in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel, in the month Ziph, which is the 2nd month, that he began to build the house of the Lord. So basically, they left Egypt around 1446 BC. After 40 years of wandering, that would be around 1406 BC. This is Bronze Age 1, when they crossed over the Promised Land and when Jericho was destroyed, according to the chronology. Solomon begins construction of the temple in 966 BC. 966 BC, and 480 years before that is whenever they left Egypt. So let's take 40 years off of that, and we're around 1406 as we're going back. There's a picture of Garstang again. And he dated the pottery at the site in the destroyed layer to 1400 BC. Around that time period, she dated it to 1550, when she thought the city was destroyed at that layer, all because she was looking for one particular pottery, again, the Cypriotic, which they already had counterfeit pottery in that layer. So it was definitely not 1550. And this guy had to agree whenever they were sharing information with him that, yeah, sounds like what you found is parallel pottery and you found counterfeit pottery. So parallel pottery is when you find something that matches up with something from down the road that's also of that time period in that destruction layer. All right, so here's a picture of like Cypriotic pottery, and this is a picture of what they found, the counterfeit stuff, which means they had seen the real deal and made their own version of it. And she was obsessed with trying to find that imported Cyprus pottery to date the layer. She completely ignored the abundant local Canaanite pottery in the layer, which matched up to other sites and excavations around there. He did find Garstang, the imitation pottery, and therefore the layer dates to the same time period as the end of Bronze Age 1. So there's the original, there's the copy, and it's interesting, on the copies you can even see like where they did the stripes and such on the other picture. All right. It was not 150 years earlier, it lines up exactly, when the city was destroyed by an earthquake and a fire. And she misinterpreted it. And now a lot of people line up with what she said, just because they desperately don't want to believe in the Bible, or they just can't reconcile it in their minds, and she was very jaded. So should we trust in what the Bible said, or what a person just a few years ago dug up and what they think? So the eyewitness account is what we should trust. And let's move on to something else there. So let's move on to Babylon, another town that had been destroyed, and there is supposed to be nothing built on top of it based on how God judged them. Remember, they were key in destroying Israelites at a certain point in time and hauling them off to captivity. And there's more videos about that too, and how they found in Babylon a record there which they actually took the captive king and they were feeding the captive king, and pretty fascinating stuff. So there were people hauled off there according to the Bible. There is Nineveh, and there is a picture of Babylon way down there between the Tigris and the Euphrates, miles away. But the two towns were similar in some ways, and quite large. So whereas a tell used to be a whole town, again, in Babylon, a tell would be just like one building that was so ginormous that you go there today and you excavate, just a large place. And then we see in Jeremiah chapter 50, therefore the wild beast of the desert, with the wild beast of the island shall dwell there, and the owls shall dwell therein, and it shall be no more inhabited forever, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation. As God overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah, and the neighbor cities thereof, saith the Lord, so shall no man abide there, neither shall any son of man dwell therein. So let's go to that town and see what it looks like today. It is desolate, but we'll show you what they do have there today. And Jeremiah chapter 50 talks some more about that. He says, behold, I will punish the king of Babylon and his land, as I have punished the king of Assyria. All right. It mentions Nebuchadnezzar there too. And Jeremiah chapter 58, verse 13, behold, the wrath of the Lord, it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Every one that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished, and hiss at all her plagues. So here we have these fellow Joel Kramer from this channel. Babylon is in present-day Iraq. It is near the present-day city of Al-Halal in central Iraq. It is 55 miles south of where Baghdad is today. Its boundaries have been based on the perimeter of the ancient city walls, which is about 1,054 hectares, or 2,600 acres, quite a large site, 2,600 acres. It is near the present-day city of Al-Halal, and let's move on here. It was the capital city of the Babylonian Empire, not Nineveh. It's a term referring to either of two separate empires in the Mesopotamian area in antiquity. Let's see here. And of course, it had been built back and destroyed many times. Along the banks of the Euphrates, it had dominance between the 19th and 15th centuries of BC, and again, between the 7th and 6th centuries BC, the city was a dominant city. All right. The earliest known mention of Babylon as a small town appears in a clay tablet from the reign of Sargon of Akkad, way back in 2300 BC, of the Akkadian Empire. And let's move on here. And the town became part of a small independent city-state. Hammurabi, you've probably heard of, the Amorite king. He founded the old Babylonian Empire in the 18th century BC. And then southern Mesopotamia became known as Babylonia. And then it became the Holy City and eclipsed other cities. Some people think the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, some people think that was actually Nineveh, based on what they found, built again by a king for his wife because she missed her homeland. And so these days, people think it was actually Nineveh, north of here. All right, here. It's been estimated that Babylon was the largest city in the world at certain points in time there, the 1700s BC, again in the 600 BC range. It was perhaps the first city to reach a population above 200,000 people. And let's see here. Let's see if I went too far. Okay. And then we talk about Nineveh. It's near the present-day city of Mosul in northern Iraq. In Nineveh, it was about 7.5 miles long, and in places up to 148 feet wide, the city wall. So we're talking about the city wall, 7.5 miles long, and up to 140 feet wide, There was also a great unfinished outer rampart protected by a moat. And it's about 317 miles south of Nineveh, depending on how you measure it. We'll go with that. Let's see if my slide's going to advance here. Okay, so here's a picture of part of this area, and we'll show you what you're looking at here in a moment. And then we pan to the right. You can take drones up, and drones are a great way to see this stuff, right? So we can see stuff from high up. And we pan to the right further, and you see this desolate site today. Let's see. I'll just use this. All right, Robert Koldewey was a German person that excavated this from 1899 to 1917. He worked on the city walls. You see that red line there? That is the wall that you can still see remnants of today. And you see the river there and such. The prophecy pertained to any part within the walls of the ancient city, not to the parts outside of the walls. And the palace, being rebuilt by Saddam Hussein, in the next slide, was actually built outside of the old walls. So this was a place that he worked on making it look better than it used to be. And here's a map of the area. The palace is there. We're going to look this direction north, and we're going to fly over the palace and head up this part of the town. We're going to keep flying north here. And way up there is a place called the Tel Babil. It's the northernmost part of the ancient city, and it's way up there. So that big old mound up there is that Tel. There's a picture of it on the map. Okay, and when you're looking the other direction, from the northern part, you'll see that area right there. There's the Tel. It's quite large. And you're looking back there, you see the arrow points to that palace we just flew over. That's Saddam marked on. And then we're looking above the Tel to the left a little bit. And you'll see a little tower there that is a modern day thing, just for a point of reference. All right. And there are the remnants of the wall right there. Let's see. And we'll show you that a little bit better. That's where the ancient wall was. Notice there's people that are not living inside of the town above that. And you can sort of see that line there where the wall remnants are. All right. So we're looking from that area. Now we're going to this part of the map, and we're looking, we can see the wall to the left and the right. To the left and the right. So we see this big old desolate area to the left, and you see that's where the wall was found. Lines up with that. Then you look to the right a little bit, and you see the wall was there. So you can see how that worked out. Then you can see that place way in the distance. And now we're about this area. We're going to zoom north a little bit here. We're going to follow the wall. And this just goes to show you how that big old line in the middle of the map is the wall there. And those places that we were at before in the northern part. And let's go here to look south from the palace, and you see there are some places to the south which have been dug up, like the Temple of Marduk, and some stuff we're going to talk about shortly. It's quite a large area, quite a large area. Modern city outside. Okay, so there was an ancient riverbed, and it's going to be displayed in blue here. The villages that were found when they excavated were outside. They were in the old riverbed. They were outside of the ancient city wall. So it lines up with prophecy. And the Palace of Hussein is where that middle place was found. Here's the ancient city, the ancient riverbed. It's changed its course. And this is the three places they found where people were living at the time when they excavated. There's the city. You can see that perimeter there for the very large battle. Okay. The ancient wall there, the ancient place where the river used to go through. Okay. No city lies within the old ancient walls. It lies desolate. And we talked about how vast it is. So let's breeze on through here, see what else we can find. There's another picture of the city wall. There's a picture of what it could have looked like years ago based on what they've dug up. Quite an impressive place. As you zoom over to the right here, pan over, you can see a lot of important structures. Nebuchadnezzar II. Nebuchadnezzar II built many of the structures which have been unearthed in the city. Let me see here. Okay. The bricks were stamped by Nebuchadnezzar II to indicate that he built them. So as we go there today, there are lower level bricks which have his name on it, and there are now upper levels because they were restored by Saddam Hussein. And he stamped the bricks himself as well as his workers there to show his work. So Nebuchadnezzar II, quite a town. This is what this one restored place looks like, but again, Hussein worked on restoring this one spot. Just for the tourists and stuff like that, because it was important. All right. So if you go up to the bricks, you can see there are stamps on them, on certain bricks. You can see the line there where there was the old bricks and the new bricks built on top. And you can just follow the stamps. Stamps like that, a long time ago. Okay. And we're just going to flip around through the place here, this large complex, and outside of the large complex, there's that area up there with the water that is now overtaken by water. Some of these sites you can't dig up as much because of the water table being a certain level. All right, there's a southern part there where there's a large area we'll talk about here shortly. And we see here a large processional way with the Ishtar gate that was there. And what was found of that. And then to the right, we'll see that place that had been restored. Moving along the ancient processional way, we see his palace on the right there, what remains of the Ishtar gate, and several temples to the gods and the goddesses of Babylon. We see the site of the sanctuary of Marduk, named the Esagila, different ways. That's the official name for that temple of Marduk, which was enormous and which was the most important temple complex in Babylon, but which is now just a large tell. And there's this processional way that you would walk down, and there's that place that had been restored, and there's where the Ishtar Gate remains have been seen. And there are different places. You can go to museums like the British Museum and other museums, and you can see reconstructions of what this grand gate and area used to look like, the Ishtar Gate. And pieces they found restored, just some fascinating facades. And you can see this large structure in the middle there, which we'll talk about. So quite an impressive place if you're walking through there. It looked something like that with the Ishtar Gate. A grand, glorious place, but again, dedicated to, false gods. All right. And then as we move past that area, we'll see some other temples that have been destroyed to other gods. And then this large complex over here. The Peribelos at Babylon, if we look at that, includes the temple of Esagila, where Marduk's statue was kept. So now we're looking at areas like this. And let's look at some other items. Babylonian clay brick from the 6th century BC with cuneiform inscription of Nebuchadnezzar support Esagila temple and temple Azida. And it talks about that. A clay tablet mentioning the dimensions of the temples of Esagila and Azida at Babylon from the 8th century BCE. And let's see, on this slide, if we need to mention any of this stuff here. There was a 7th-floor high temple, which some people think could be the Tower of Babel, but this seems to be way past the Tower of Babel stage. And there were instructions about the dimensions and how to build that there. The ziggurat. The statue of Marduk, pictured on a stele there, from another king from 12th century BC. That's a picture of what the statue looked like. The statue of Marduk depicted as being mounted on Marduk's dragon. Riding a dragon was a thing back then for their gods with their big old stories. and standing victorious in the primordial water. This was found in a cylinder seal of the 9th century BC. This is a close-up of a colossal stone statue of the god Nebu, which was the son of Marduk, that they said that Nebu was his son, and this is a statue of that god they had. There's a picture of that. Nebu was originally a Western Semitic god, and he later became the most popular god in Assyria and significant to the Babylonians as well. His main center of worship was in Borsippa, but his statue was brought to Babylon for the New Year's festivities. He was credited as the inventor of cuneiform writing and a keeper of tablets, and associated with agriculture. So that's a little bit more about their gods there. And we see some red arrows, the towering ziggurat, and the lower temple for the statue of Marduk, seated on a throne. So there's a picture of those two areas. Let's go on here. And Isaiah chapter 13 talks a little bit about Babylon some more. Isaiah 13, 19 through 22. About how it's going to be desolate, wild beasts. And then Jeremiah 50, verse 39, talks about the wild beasts that will live there. And if you go there today, you see desolation. You can walk down into those areas we just pictured, and you can see tracks all over the place of wild animals, because they're all over the place, just like the Bible said they would be today. You can even pick up these pieces of pottery all over the place, just scattered on the ground, painted, amazing pieces of, whether it was pieces of building or a pot or what have you, from what used to be there. And you can see just a lot of desolation and a lot of erosion over time. Nobody wants to hang out around there. And you can see these caves in the hillside where the wild animals live at. And you can just pick through the stuff and find stuff yourself. To this day, you can just pick through the rocks there and find some fascinating stuff that was burned as well. A lot of destruction. You can stand on top of that tell there, and you can look towards the other parts of Babylon, far in the distance. You can just sit, you can just kneel down and find some interesting fragments of stuff with hieroglyphics on there. You can read the hieroglyphics if you know about it. You can find traces of animals, animal paths all over the place, and pictures of some of the animals that basically are hanging out there. You got, coyotes and some other wild animals that hang out there to this day. It's not a place you want to really live at. Nope. And then this one guy captured an actual wolf from that site and kept it in his house on a chain for some reason. Wouldn't advise that, but it was one of the wolves that were hanging out there. Okay, and again, a picture of what it used to look like many years ago. And let's see here. Just a whole bunch of desolation to this day. And that's all we'll cover for today. Next time, we'll cover something else next week. And appreciate it.